a component. It just came into my head that that's what I was going to do. I wasn't exactly sure why. So I've been trying to kind of piece it together a bit since then. So the aim of our Dharma life is to uncover a new possibility of what it is to be human. And depending on what your sort of Dharma life myth is, you know, you're either working to transform yourself or you're working to uncover it as it already is. You know, there's various different myths of the spiritual life, and depending on which one it is. But we're definitely clear that there is a default to being human, which has at its core a habit for craving, aversion, and delusion. So that's our kind of default way of relating to the world. And part of that is that for the most part, we habitually experience life as if we're a subject and we're in this world of objects. So there's a me in here that consists of feelings, thoughts, volitions, perceptions, and all the labels that we're continually conceptually putting over things. So there's this experience of form, and in a sense, the elements are our way of experiencing form. And form can be experienced in the four physical elements: earth, water, fire, and air. The four physical elements are kind of how experience first meets form, you know, and these different qualities of form. Form that is firm, form that is fluid, form that has temperature associated with it, and then air, which is the least form-like, but is still considered one of the physical elements, even though it's intangible, really. So whatever threatens the me in here that comes from out there, what threatens the me in here, our kind of consistent habitual response to that is to tighten our muscles, tighten our posture, sort of almost like a psychic sort of, you know, energetic tightening, a tightening and a turning away. So that's a sort of, you know, and if you look at people's bodies, you just sort of look at, you know, people's postures and people's bodies, and it's sort of a lifetime of tightening up and turning away, really. You just have a little feel in your body and see the different little knots, the little tightnesses and different, you know, bits of us that kind of, so yeah, just see if you can right now, just see if you can untighten just where you are right now. See if you could just get 10% more relaxed, just 10% more comfortable. You don't have to put up with something, just see if you can just, because that in itself, just every time we stop and we soften, that right there is a sort of a training away from that impulse to tighten and turn away. So to relax is a revolutionary act, you guys. Relaxing and softening and turning towards are in themselves the opposite of what we're habitually sort of, you know, that's an automatic way of being. So what we're trying to do by reflecting on the elements is, or the qualities of the elements is, and we kind of just need to keep doing this over and over again. It's not a kind of one time and it's done. It needs to keep being absorbed at deeper and deeper and deeper levels of our being. We begin to break this habit of how we see the world, which creates tension, which creates turning away, which creates suffering. So we're trying to redress this particular habit. So each element gives us a sort of access into these different perspective. And the air element, is particularly interesting because it is form, but yet it's quite a mysterious kind of form, because it holds form, it moves form around, but in itself it can't be grasped. And I think that is something that we can reflect on. What is it then? What exactly is it? It's hugely powerful, and it's also the most immediate bestower of life. As Joshua was saying, that it doesn't take long. If you take away the breath, if you take away breathing, it doesn't take long for us to not have breath anymore. So it's a very immediate bestower of life. And I think if you look at the epistemology surrounding air, breath, wind, there's some very interesting associations that can be made. So, there is the inspiration. Inspiration is both taking in of breath, but also, what is inspiration? Inspiration in itself is something you can't really exactly put your finger on it, but yet when it's there, it's so strong. It's just like the wind, in a sense, that you can't say exactly how it gets there or exactly what it is, but it's completely palpable, it's real, and it has a very strong effect when we are inspired, or when we're receiving people who are inspired. It really has an effect. So it's, in the Chinese form, qi energy is both associated with the breath and with the life force, of the energy. And breath and life force, as Tim did in his yoga session today, are very, very closely connected. And the quality of our breathing, there's a whole new sort of wave of interest in the breath at the moment that's kind of taking the blogosphere and the podcaster sphere by storm, where there's a book called a scientific approach to the age-old question of breathing, or I can't remember what the exact words are of the book, but people are getting really interested in, again, on the power of breathing to affect all kinds of things within us. So the breath and the wind moves things, affects how we feel. I was wondering if anyone, what it was like when you imagine the wind blowing in your face, and there's this expression that I'm going to go and have the cobwebs blown out of my, cobwebs in my mind, and I'm going to, allow the wind to just, blow them out. So there's a sense of something being refreshed. So there's a kind of freshness and aliveness to do with the air element. Another thing that I think is interesting is that when babies are born, they've been in water all the time. And when they come into the air, when the air hits their face, that is the cue for the inspiration. They breathe because they feel the cold air. And there's a term for it, this particular reflex that happens that actually causes breath. So it's that contact with the air. So again, it's this sort of life and breath are kind of very connected. And then there's the word spirit. In quite a few cultures, spirit and inspiration, is associated again with the wind and with air. And when someone has spirit, they've got spirit. They've really got spirit. And but what is that? Again, it's not something that you can easily pin down or say exactly what it is. And yet, it's very real, it's very affecting. You know, someone with spirit, you know, has a great effect. Maybe not always, but it could be a different kind of spirit. So it causes some sort of movement, some kind of flow in the body, in the mind. And it affects things like the sand or the leaves. You know, things can get blown. It allows for pollination. So without having any form, and with being able to take and get into any sort of form, it's that sort of strange mixture of something being invisible and not tangible and not controllable, and yet very powerful. And normally we associate power with things that we can control or that we can see and that are tangible. So this is sort of quite an opposite to that. So it has this sense of flow, of energy, and the ability to be quite spontaneous. You know, you can be walking along, la la la, and then the wind just blows your hat off, and it's gone. I remember when I was about 11, I was in France sur le pont d'Avignon, and I had a little orange hat, and it just blew off into the wind, into the river, and then just got taken away. So it's got this slightly erratic, spontaneous quality to it. It's also, I think, associated with speech, with songs, and in certain energy systems, the air element is associated with the throat chakra, because songs are kind of similar in that, you know, where are they? Where do they exist? They can make you cry, and they're really intense, but then the record stops, and where were they? You know, where were they? You just can't grasp hold of it, and yet it's very powerful and very affecting. So I saw an association with forgiveness. I hope it's not too tangential, but for me, I saw that the quality of air was the possibility of flow, of spontaneity, of aliveness, of lightness, quality of lightness, and I associated that with, you know, the opposite of when we are feeling bogged down with someone or something, that sometimes it's a sort of stagnant energy. It's an energy where we've been holding on to something, possibly from the past, possibly from a long time ago, but it seems like that's the opposite of energy flowing freely, and being able to move, to be spontaneous, and to have this sense of freedom. So whenever we have a situation or an individual with whom we feel this sort of density and this sort of heaviness and the lack of flow and the lack of being able to be free in association with them, a lack of ability to be spontaneous, a lack of lightness, then, you know, I think, you know, could we use the air element and our immersion in the air element to see if we can use our appreciation and our sense of this element to bring in, to kind of leaven it. You know, when you're beating a cake, I've got a friend who makes fantastic cakes, and she's like, it's all about how much, it's all about the air, Amaragita, she says, beating the cake, it's all about the air, how much air you get into it. You know, that makes the cake light and, you know, fluffy and, you know, just delicious, you know. So it's how much air can we bring some air into the places where we felt a bit stagnant or a bit dense or a bit gritty or a bit tight. Can we use the air element to free ourselves a little bit and to see if there's something new we can see in a situation? So let's see if we can blow away a few cobwebs through invoking the air element. So we're going to do a little exercise, and there's a couple of things to just say before it. So first of all, how I've defined forgiveness is that forgiveness is an act of self-generosity. So forgiveness isn't something that you have to do, or you ought to do, or you must do, or you should do. Forgiveness could be just seen as an act of self-generosity, an act of trying to beat some air into the cake mixture so that the cake can rise, the cake can be light, and we can enjoy it, have the freedom to enjoy it. So it's not a have to, it's not a should, could be seen as an act of self-generosity. Secondly, it can't be willed. Yeah, so you can't force yourself to do it. It cannot be willed. All we can do is create the conditions and have an intention and see what happens. So these places in us, these places of lack of flow or of stagnation or of staleness, they have their own time and their own agendas. You know, they need to be respected in that you can't force something to bloom by just telling it needs to bloom now. But you can keep creating the conditions and have the intention for it to bloom. So the third point is that one of my favorite formulations of the Dharma life comes from the Zen tradition. It says that the purpose of the Dharma life is to know and love yourself and the world, firstly. Secondly, to get over yourself and the world. And thirdly, to improve the self and the world. And I find this formulation, for some reason, delightful and really, really helpful. So in looking at the air and in looking at this forgiveness, it's definitely in the category of wanting to get over self and world. But that has to be taken, the getting over has to not be what we sometimes call spiritual bypassing. Yeah, where we're just like, oh yes, I'm over it because I want to be a very spiritual person. And, you know, it's that sort of long neck syndrome where you want to get away from things being messy and things being uncomfortable and things just not being how we want them to be. So we've got to really guard against spiritual bypassing. It's not about spiritual bypassing. So in that sense of there's the getting over aspect, but then there's also if we can't get over it, if we're not able in that moment to let go, even just a little bit, then the other aspect of knowing and loving ourselves, and knowing and loving that aspect of ourselves that can't let go in the moment, also needs to come into play at that point. So we want to guard against that. So this act of stopping and looking at things that perhaps feel a bit stuck or uncomfortable or a bit stale, I think is what we practice meditation for. Yeah, we're not practicing meditation to avoid life. We're practicing meditation to be able to turn towards difficult things and to engage with them and to see reality in them and see how we can enable them to move on, allow them to move on. So what we're going to do is we're going to just check on the time. Yeah, we're going to start our reflection. So the first thing to do is that we're going to just find a comfortable position. You can lie down if you want, put your feet up, get cozy. See how relaxed you can get. And when you've got relaxed, just see if you can get yourself 10% even more relaxed and more comfortable than you are. What would you need to do to just be just 10% more relaxed? So just by encouraging ourselves to be at ease, to not be in a state of vigilance where the subject in here needs to protect itself from the objects out there. Just by that act, we are moving against the grain of our habitual tendency. And just noticing that the breath is coming in and out. And that you're having an experience of being alive. And there's nothing that you have to do about that. Just this aliveness happening. You have the support of the form, the ground, whatever is firm around you, that is supporting you. There is already a huge amount in your experience that is flowing beautifully. Your blood is flowing, your lymph is flowing, the air around you is flowing. Thoughts and emotions that are flowing. You can just allow the emphasis on the out breath. Just allow yourself to have a sense of letting go on the out breath and just seeing how long an out breath you can muster. So first of all, you're just going to have a sense of your body. I'm just going to ask you a question and then just see what arises And if nothing much arises, that's fine. There'll be another question. So the question is there anywhere in your body or any aspect of your body that you feel any degree of resentment towards, ill will towards, or aversion towards? You're just allowing yourself to sort of clock that. There is anywhere. You're not going to turn away from that. You're just going to note it with interest. There may be somewhere in the body, some part of the body that we feel a sense of resentment or aversion. Now you're going to look into your emotional life, your moods, the highs and the lows, how you feel about things and people. Is there any aspect of your emotional life, any particular emotions that you feel you have a sense of resentment or aversion or ill will towards? Any aspect of your experience that feels annoying, that you wish to turn away from habitually? And if you recognize something, just noticing any desire to turn away from it, and just see if you can stay with it. Just be aware of your breath. And is there any part of your thinking, any habitual thought ruts that you have a tendency to feel irritable with, annoyed with, aversion towards? And lastly, is there anyone you have a feeling that you would like to have some more freedom with? Sense perhaps of something being a bit stagnant or stale. in your relationship. We're just doing a little housekeeping, just looking at the nooks and crannies, if we can find things that are a bit stagnant or a bit stale, where we've turned away or we've been caught in some aversion. And just turning towards them in a relaxed environment. You might notice some tension creeping into your body as you are with these things. You just keep bringing yourself back to seeing if you can soften the body, but just have an awareness of any of these things. So that's the end of the reflection. And what I'd like you to do is, I should have said this to you before, if you have a pen and paper, and then just write down anything that you were shown or you saw in those 4 areas, anything that feels a bit stagnant, stale, anything that you have some aversion to, anything that could do with a bit of lightening. It doesn't have to be a lot, it can just be a couple of words. Anything that's come from that reflection. Okay, so what I'd like you to do now is we're going to go a little bit, one step further in the reflection. And what I'd like you to think about first of all is the context that you're in. So choose something. It's a bit like when you choose the enemy or the difficult person in the Metta Bhavana. You want to choose someone who's not going to completely derail your meditation in that moment, given the context that you're in. So we've just had a little look through this reflection, and you know yourself, you know what support systems you have around you. So be responsible for your own well-being in terms of what you want to choose to kind of just look into a little bit more deeply. Hope that makes sense. Just choose one thing that you'd like to just investigate. So it could be a person, someone that you'd like to have a bit more freedom or spontaneity, or it could be an aspect of your experience. Just choose one of the things that popped up in the reflection. And what you're going to do on your bit of paper is you're going to just look. I'm going to share my screen. Can everyone see this little screen? So you're going to, first of all, this is the place, this is the quadrant for your thinking about this issue or this person. What you say is true about them. So I think that they are defensive, and they are arrogant, and they are not, and they don't value me. So you're going to write what you think is true about either the person or the aspect of experience. So it's at the level of thought. And then in the next one along, you're going to just write, when I'm thinking those thoughts about that person, when I'm thinking they're defensive or that they don't value me, how do I feel? And you're going to just try to access a couple of feelings there. How do I feel? I feel a bit shaky, and I feel uncertain, and I feel uncomfortable. And then you're asking yourself, when you're feeling shaky and uncertain and uncomfortable, what actions do you take? What do you do? When you're feeling those feelings, what do you do? So I shut down, I avoid that person, and I don't want to talk to them. So you just write that in the actions. And then in the results, the result is I blame the person. So what's the result of my actions of avoiding them? The result of my actions of avoiding them, not wanting to talk to them, is that I never get to know them any better. And I just stay confirmed in my opinions about them. So you're just going to go around, and it's what you'll see is that it's a bit, this leads to that, this leads to that, this leads to that, and then this, the result, normally kind of proves your initial opinions and beliefs, kind of justifies them or proves them right. So I'll just give you about just over 5 minutes. Just move through those 4 quadrants and seeing Just try to feel your way. Would you like me to keep that up, the quadrants? Or are you okay? You'd like it up, okay. So in a few minutes, we're going to just have a 5-minute comfort break, get a cup of tea, and then we'll come back. What we're really doing is we're using the sense of the air element in terms of how it creates a sense of freshness and flow and vitality and aliveness, and we're using that to juxtapose areas in our life that have an absence of that, or relationships that have an absence, with that longing for a sense of freedom and for a sense of how can I relate to this? How can I, by looking into it and by bringing my awareness to it, how can I free something up so that something can flow a bit more freely? And all that's needed is the relaxation, the awareness, and the turning towards being willing to be with and see things slide by slide by slide, see what's happening in this particular arena for ourselves. So when you come back from the break, I'm going to put you into, or Jolie's going to put you into some breakout rooms. If you don't want to go in a breakout room, then you can stay in the main room and just hang out there until we come back and hear back from people. But hopefully you'll want to just share with the people in your breakout room just a little bit of your cycle, whatever it is that feels comfortable and that you want to share. Yeah, in the service of seeing how we can get a bit of air in and a bit of flow in. So Jolie, do you want to